Hey everyone, welcome back to today's matchup. Are you thinking about buying a high-end 2022 TV as prices start dropping this year? In this video I'm going to talk about some differences I saw between the A95K, the S95B, and the C2. If you want more specific details on each TV, you can check out the individual reviews I made on these three TVs earlier this year. This is going to be a very short comparison, mentioning some observations when these three TVs were side by side. On the top left, you can see the Sony A95K, at the top right is the Samsung S95B, and at the bottom right is the LG C2. So, my first impressions when I took these TVs out of the box and played with the picture settings a little, I instantly gravitated towards the A95K. The QD-OLED picture was beautiful with a very high quality look to it. Colors were incredible, and bright highlights and HDR really stood out. Looking at some early measurements, I could see the Sony was very accurate in filmmaker mode, as expected. The Samsung's picture was also beautiful, but even in filmmaker mode I could see it still had some classic Samsung pop. The colors were a little oversaturated, but that slight color push on the quantum dot display produced a very vibrant image that was very hard to look away from. I honestly thought going into the comparison the LG was going to get a serious beatdown. It almost felt unfair to put it in the same competition as the two QD-OLEDs. But the LG really won me over with its beautiful OLED display. And with all of the C2's utility, I think it's actually the best all-around TV of the three. You can see in this shot the difference in bright highlights between the two QD-OLEDs and the C2. By the way, all three TVs are displaying content in HDR10. You won't be seeing differences between Dolby Vision and HDR10+. You can see in this scene as well. The bright reflective surfaces and dark scenes just shine brighter on the QD-OLEDs. The picture doesn't look bad on the C2 by any means, but it can't hit those highs that the Sony and Samsung can. But aside from the higher brightness, it's the colors that the QD-OLEDs bring to the OLED TV space. Colors and bright scenes on the S95B and A95K do not lose their vibrancy like you typically see on WOLEDs. It may not be apparent on the video, but the C2's colors can get a little washed out at times, while the colors on the A95K and S95B manage to punch through. If you've previously owned OLED TVs, I think one of these QD-OLEDs would be a step up in performance for you. The C2 does show just how beautiful OLED TVs can be, but when it was released it was more of a step forward in OLED performance, instead of a step up, if that makes sense. Of course games look great on all three displays. All three have fast response times and support 4K at 120Hz. The Sony only has two HDMI 2.1 inputs, while the LG and Samsung have four. Overall, the LG is the gaming king out of the three, with the most support for gaming features. The Samsung started out a top contender when it was first released, but a lot of troublesome firmware updates affected some aspects of picture performance, and left a bad taste in the mouths of gamers who have an eye for display accuracy. Casual gamers will probably not notice or care, but it is something to consider. The Sony has the least amount of gaming features. The TV definitely wasn't designed with hardcore gaming in mind. The S95B felt like it had the slowest operating system out of the three. Of course it wasn't as bad as a $200 smart TV with a very slow OS. I'm not saying it drove me crazy with freezing and bad lagging, but cycling back and forth between the three TVs, it was noticeable. The only example I could record was this shot where all three TVs are hooked up to my Blu-ray player, which I just turned off. You can see how long it takes each TV to report the no signal message, with the Sonys coming up first, followed by the LG and then the Samsung. Obviously, a delay for something like this isn't the end of the world. It's just a visual I'm providing to summarize the responsiveness I experienced on each TV. But this does go along with what I observed. The Sony felt like it had the snappiest user interface, followed by the LG and then the Samsung. Before I give the final summary for each TV, I just wanted to say that it surprised me how close I was able to get each of these three TVs to look after calibrating them all. The Sony's colors didn't change too much because it was already pretty accurate, but calibrating the Samsung took away the slight oversaturation and made it look much more similar to the Sony. The LG obviously couldn't get as bright as the QD-OLEDs, but calibration definitely gave some of the colors in HDR a more accurate hue. I think the C2 benefited the most from calibration, and I feel like it took a step closer to competing with the A95K and S95B. If you're seriously considering one of these three TVs, Let's talk about which one is best for you. We'll start with prices. In the US, at the time I'm releasing this video, the 55-inch Sony A95K is around $1,000 more expensive than the Samsung and the LG. The Samsung is only about $200 more than the LG. So on the more affordable end of these TVs, how should you decide between the Samsung and the LG? If you're not a hardcore gamer that's interested in creators' visual intent, and you're not married to Dolby Vision content, I'd say get the Samsung. The picture on the S95B is absolutely beautiful, and it has 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, so you'll have no connectivity issues. It does support HDR10+, which more content is being released in, so you can still get a great HDR experience. It had the highest peak luminance in HDR out of the 3 TVs, and the difference is definitely noticeable in some scenes compared to the LG, but not really noticeable compared to the Sony. If you are a hardcore gamer that wants all the gaming features you can get on a TV, you'll probably want to go for the LG instead. Or if you have a bunch of Ultra HD Blu-rays in Dolby Vision, and Dolby Vision is something that is very important to you, the LG C2 will deliver for you. Even though it can't get as bright as the QD-OLEDs in this comparison, it still has fantastic contrast from its OLED panel, and the image processing is great. Like I said earlier, it's just a fantastic all-around TV, and it did much better in this comparison than I thought it would. It also comes in more sizes. The A95K and S95B are only available in 55 and 65 inch. You can also consider the LG G2, which is a little brighter than the C2, but also more expensive. Why buy the Sony? Honestly, accuracy bragging rights. It has the same panel as the S95B, with the same color gamut coverage and just slightly less peak luminance than the Samsung. But it's the most accurate in SDR and HDR. Especially after calibration, the HDR numbers are amazing. The video processing and responsiveness of the Google TV OS was also the best in my opinion, but not enough to justify the large price gap. If you are a casual gamer who only uses one gaming device, or you don't game at all, the 2 HDMI 2.1 ports should be fine for you. If you love watching movies in the dark, the experience you get with the A95K is hard to beat. Except at price. Spending over $2,000 on a 55-inch TV is a tough sell, and whether it's worth it or not is up to you. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions on any of these 3 TVs, feel free to ask them in the comments below. Which one of these TVs would you want if you had the choice? Or which do you already own? Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. You look pretty good as a blonde gem.